Good afternoon, everybody. I am Ali from Thompson Redwood, and this is Dr. Judi, our international veterinary advisor. And we wanted to meet today and have a bit of a chat specifically about Equi-Restore and its applications for veterinarians and vet practices, in particular vet hospitals, where you've got horses that may have been in for conditions such as colic, maybe they're recovering from surgery or major injuries, and where recovery is a really integral part of getting them over their conditions and home to their owners. Dr. Judy's been doing a lot of research into recovery nutrition, and that's part of why we've put together Equi-Restore as the product that we have. So Dr. Judi, thank you for joining us today, and we're very excited to have a chat about this. So to start with, let's have a bit of a rundown. If you could give us a rundown on what Equi-Restore is.
So Equi-Restore was put together as a bit of a brainchild between us all, wanting to give people an option that is hydrating, nutritious, but in the right balance of energy, protein, electrolytes, but also with nice additives in it that are going to support the horse in terms of recovery, but also their immune, their digestive tract. So really we wanted a one-stop shop, definitely a mash to help with rehydration that was going to help horses that are traveling, that need to sort of bounce back, or, for whatever reason needed a wetter feed just to try and keep things flowing through, or because they can't chew particularly well. So principally it was a performance recovery mash is what we were after. So we were looking at it very much from a performance horse in Australia that's doing bigger distances in terms of traveling, and therefore dehydration being the number one limiting factor for their performance. We want to make sure that when they arrive, they're already topped up and ready to rock and roll, but also during the course of the competition period that they're there, they're going to maintain their performance and sort of continue to strive to do their best work. So that was really the principle behind what we designed, but actually on reflection, being sort of a long-term equine vet, I have many ponderings and quite a few things I thought, gosh, that's really applicable to when we have horses in the hospitalized environment. And, there are occasions where me in particular, I'll look back at clinical cases and think, gosh, if I had taken the nutritional considerations into as much detail as what we were doing medically or surgically, I actually think we may have had a better outcome. And so therefore now I've got my full-time nutrition hat on. It's really just speaking out to vets and people that have horses that are undergoing sort of veterinary care or clinical care at this point, and what we can suggest in terms of what might help benefit that horse's recovery.
Absolutely. And I think since Equi-Restore's launched, we've already had a number of vets locally that have started using the product, as well as a number of customers that, just wanting to give their horses the best start, have given them Equi-Restore. I know we've had a customer recently that had a horse with colic, and in their post recovery, they've had Equi-Restore and finding just they're going from strength to strength quite quickly, which is brilliant. So I think, the product we've really formulated on such a high level with the inclusion of the electrolytes, the branched chain amino acids, the super fibers, and as you said, the fact that it's a mash, it means that we're able to monitor and get water into horses, and we can see how much they're taking in. So I think to start off with, there's a lot of cases of this that are getting around at the moment, given that it's summer, but colic is one of those conditions that horse owners know all too well and vets know all too well. So let's have a bit of a chat about Equi-Restore and the benefits of it for a horse that has had a bout of colic or even colic surgery.
So, the most common colic out here at this time of year is the impaction colics. Not enough hydration through the digestive tract leads to compression and dehydration of the fecal material, and it gets usually the pelvic flexure and just grinds to a halt. And at that point, everything else backs up. Horse becomes painful, and you end up quite a very uncomfortable horse, but also quite a big problem to solve from a veterinary point of view. Usually they'll start with high volume water flushing through the system to try and get the horse tubed and get the water in, and try and improve motility and hydration of that gut. From a preventative point of view, if you've got a horse that isn't a good drinker and that you are trying to kind of maintain during this time of year, Equi-Restore will make so much sense because obviously giving a mash, you're giving extra water anyway. But with the spike of electrolytes in this product, it's going to encourage the horses drinking further. So, not good drinkers will generally drink more as well as having a wet feed, which is
Mm.
adding more in. So, more is more in that situation. But secondarily to that, the actual inclusion of the 20% fiber, but a significant amount of that being super fibers, they really are helping with the gut process and the fermentation and the motility. And again, Action is really coming into its own there to sort of promote, a really good gut microbiome and optimizing sort of gut health. And again, these horses, if they have had a problem there, it will precipitate into their hind gut.
Mm.
So you will, especially after an impaction, this is probably where it comes back more to the vet, where once you flush that gut, we all know what happens. That when you pile that much water through it, it tends to just dilute everything. And the horse is dysbiotic afterwards, so they just don't have the best intestinal health in terms of their microbiome. And at that point, you really want to try and repopulate it and refaunate it with things that are really beneficial for that horse. And that's where super fibers plus the substrate of,
Mm.
Action to really promote that is a very, very sensible thing to be giving a horse. And a lot of these horses with their fiber fermentation, if you can optimize that, it'll help break down those larger particle fibers, and therefore they will pass through that area a little bit easier. So it is really beneficial.
It's certainly something, the risk of recurrence is always so high. So doing the best we can to get them onwards and upwards after an episode is so important. So what about, if we've got a horse that's gone through a surgical procedure in that recovery phase, you've had a general anesthetic, they're in an environment that they're not necessarily familiar with. How does a product like Equi-Restore help as a part of their diet through recovery?
It's multifactorial. So again, horses that are coming into a hospitalized environment are significantly more likely to dehydrate. Many reasons behind that. A lot to do with the lack of water intake. And so horses don't drink very well in new and unusual places for many reasons, different bucket, stress. Sometimes their water's taken away because they've been sedated. So there's lots of reasons behind that. But horses that have gone through, in particular, surgery, either elective or emergency, if we look at elective to begin with, they will have had their food taken away for them for a
Mm.
period of time before the surgery. And that will slow down the gut transit. And it does ultimately dehydrate them a bit as well because they're not drinking and eating as normal.
Mm.
Then they go into a surgical environment where they are given maintenance fluids often, but they won't be given sort of the true full flow level of what you would want them to have if they were staying, tip top hydration. You're usually starting from a slightly dehydrated place. And then, of course, during the recovery period, the horses going through recovery will sweat. They will lose a lot of electrolytes. There's a whole process around their muscles and how their muscles react to an
Mm.
anesthetic. Of course, they get turned upside down and put on their backs, so you get an awful lot of muscle contact with the ground, which horses aren't particularly happy about. From that point of view, there's probably two main reasons why we Restore should be the product of choice whenever you're recovering a horse, once they've finished out of the recovery box and walking back into their stable. Firstly, if they're a little inappetent, you can make it a bit warm, which is lovely because, the Slurpee will go down nicely. Equally, you can stomach tube it if you just want to get the guts going and you just don't think the horse is going to eat all by itself. But more importantly, it'll be the branched chain amino acids that you're looking for. So the electrolytes are great. They're going to stimulate thirst response. They're also going to give them a shot of electrolytes, which, given a fat, it'll feel like they've run a marathon by the end of that GA.
Mm.
They're going to really need to get themselves back on track. But the branched chain amino acids, I mean, in theory, we'd like to give it pre and post operatively because they do help if you get them on before. And so ideally, if it was an elective surgery, you could do that. But certainly post-operatively, they will help with the DOMS, the delayed onset muscle soreness that
Mm.
anybody who's ever done it at the gym will know. And that's something that, anything to avoid that pain is helpful. So yeah, the branched chain amino acids, really their key goal is to try and reduce that. So by managing your electrolyte status and your amino acids, that's going to really help benefit those horses in terms of the duration of the recovery phase. So some
Mm.
horses, when they come out of a general anesthetic, will take a week to 10 days to look normal. And generally they're just slow to recover because they're a bit dehydrated going in. They had a horrible recovery. And I mean, any vet that's watched recoveries, some of them don't recover well. They need sedated heavily. They take a long time to get to their feet, or they spend a lot lot of time fighting the anesthetic and crashing off walls, all of which is
Mm.
causing damage to their muscles, and it's just not helping them. And so, although it's not going to help with, if it's cantered full pace into a wall, it is going to help in terms of the muscles and the sort of spasms that are going on, and trying to help ease that out, really. The main thing is really to try and support what you have when you're in that environment.
Look, it's any little bit that you can do to soften that process makes a big difference. And I think, as we've talked about before, and both both horses have been a big part of our lives, and we've had horses in hospitals before. Um, if they're in them there for a few days, regardless of what the process is, keeping them hydrated, but keeping their guts working, and then giving them the best chance possible to come back to you as the owner, if in fact they're coming back to you on site, is going to be, a really core part of that. One thing we've, really highlighted with Equi-Restore in some of our previous discussions is that as a recovery supplement that does have the electrolytes in it, is quite kind on the gut, and that the dilution factor with the water is quite kind. And perhaps if you could touch on a little bit about some of the gastric conditions, and then sort of softening that through that process, even for horses that might not necessarily be prone, but just in a higher stress environment.
So, horses that are hospitalized are significantly more likely to develop gastric ulceration than unhospitalized horses. A stress of being in a different environment, but also the likelihood that they'll be sedated and therefore they will not have water intake for a period of time. Then they will be sweating on top of that through the sedation. And so, by giving something like Equi-Restore, what you're really trying to do is improve the hydration status when they are back to eating. The other benefit to that would be that it's very palatable. So,
Mm,
it's got really nice flavoring to it. They seem to really enjoy slurping it up. So if you've got a horse that is a bit off their food, or they just back off whenever they're in a strange
mm,
environment, be it a showground or an equine hospital, they just want to spend their entire time with the nose out the stable door and not in their feed bucket. It can be a really nice thing to have, and especially because realistically it's 9% starch, so you're not going to blow their heads if you give them 4 or 5 Slurpees a day. So
mm.
that sort of thing's going to really help, because they will generally, when they're hospitalized and they're in a bit of stress and they are hyperacidic and they're looking around and they just don't know what the thing's about, you can give them a bucket and generally they'll eat the bucket. They're just not going to eat their hay and relax. And so, if you can make lots of little meals up, the sort of energy and protein levels that you're giving, you're going to be able to support them nutritionally without doing too much in terms of like crazy things with their starch levels. So you can kind of trickle that in throughout the day. It can be really beneficial. And again, if you want to be giving them something little and often because you're not quite sure where they are in the schedule and you're just trying to keep them sort of settled, it's quite a good idea, because again, it's liquid, so it's just going to pass through really quickly, and not cause you major problems. So that's kind of where I would use it most frequently, I would think.
I think that probably leads us on to the next point, is how we feed it. So it is a supplement. It's designed, and DrJudi's formulated it to feed on top of an existing ration. If there's a hospital or a practice that has a set diet that you might be using for the horses that you've got in there, for the horses that you've got there, either recovering, spelling, or on agistment, it does fit nicely on top of what you are already feeding. And as Judi touched on, it can be fed multiple times a day. So the way that it has been structured and formulated means that you could feed it. You could feed it once, or it does work really well if it is stacked and offered a couple of times. So, for instance, for a horse that isn't drinking or really coming onto their feed, lots of little feeds throughout the day can really help to build that. And because of the flexibility, having it as part of your practice can work really well. It's just something which a lot of our customers are finding they are discovering more and more applications for it as they use it. You can feed it on its own as a mash, or you can feed it mixed into an existing ration. So as Judy said, for a horse that's not taking to its feed, because it's got quite high palatability, it smells really good. Mixing it into the feed has been working quite well as well. Horses are seeming to sort of really take it on.
And also, because it is so palatable. The other win for vets and vet nurses in practice would be if you've got horses that are really struggling to eat their medication but are a nightmare
Mm,
to inject. It's a really nice thing to be giving them. So because again, the nutrition has been built so that it is a supplement, you can pretty much feed it to any age group. And so, if you've got a fractious yearling in, and he's a cold and he's had enough, and you think, right, I'm going to put him on some oral medication. What can I do? Then that would be where I'd be looking to give them the mash, and then start to work out whether or not you can fit his antibiotics or his pain meds in there.
mm,
Because certainly at home we've been using it quite regularly with things that need the sachet view but are really difficult to get it in. So it just has that lovely, you can make it into sort of a bit of a sticky mash rather than the really wet mash for those ones. And so they have to just sort of slobber their way around the bucket. And then you know that you're getting the bulk of it into them, which is great because yeah, it saves everyone the battle of trying to force it down.
look, it's not a battle that we always like to have, but it's necessary.
I think certainly for horses, I mean, from a veterinary point of view, looking at horses that have got those sort of wider issues. If horses have got any of the dental issues or chewing
Mm,
issues or something where you're worried about how they're going to eat and chew, I think this particular product for horses with dental issues that have probably not got as much weight on as possible, and they are performance horses, and you want to keep them in work, or you need to kind of keep them going, and you need to keep the muscle on them. I think again, this is another thing from a clinical point of view. I would have had a fair caseload of performance horses that are on the sort of mid to late teens that have got diastemas, or
mm,
they're just not good chewers. And when you're competing and trying to keep them at the top level for the junior rider or whoever's come on board, then the main goal there really is to try and support them nutritionally. And again,
mm.
from a veterinary point of view, this makes a lot of sense for those horses because you've got the actogen, you've got the fact it's a mash, it's a pellet, so again, its digestibility is brilliant. You're keeping them hydrated, you've got them on plenty of electrolytes then to kind of keep them ticking over and maintaining their performance levels. And I think certainly from that point of view, it would make really good sense to be feeding those types of horses because the amino acids are what we're after to put the muscle on, and it has it in abundance. So it'll really help support them and keep them going along. So it'd be another one just to keep in your arsenal as a sort of veterinary clinical vet trying to put this through onto the owner and get them on board.
Absolutely. It's something too that our team, obviously, we've got Dr. Judi on hand, that we're always able to help with recommendations. If you've got horses that need a little bit of nutritional help, please reach out to us. We're always happy to point you in the right direction. And I think that's probably another really good point to raise. If you've got any questions for Dr. Judi, we are happy to answer them. We've been doing a series on Equi-Restore and nutrition, and a few of the benefits for it for performance horses as well as broodmares and foals during weaning. There's a lot of applications. It's just one of those products that we're really excited about, and I mean we love it. But it was formulated for a reason because it's really beneficial in so many different cases. So if you do have any clinical questions for Dr. Judi about it or about any other nutrition subjects, please feel free to submit them. You can send them through to me at thompsonredwood.com.au, or you message us through our social media channels, and we can certainly pop another video together and answer them. And spreading more information on horse nutrition is something that we're really passionate about doing. So Dr. Judi, thank you for your time today. Thank you to any of our vets out there listening. Hopefully we've helped answer some questions, and if you need any more information on the product, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us. So thank you.